Okay, so we're expecting another person to join, but she was delayed. So Mr. Supervisor, you want to introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself?
Sure. Glad to join you tonight. Ed Theobald, Town of Manlius Supervisor.
And I'm Sarah Bollinger, a town councilor, and I've been on the planning process committee with Allison Weber, who is our town clerk.
Hello.
The planning process committee also includes Joe Lupia, who is the chair of the planning board, Randy Capriati, who's the codes enforcement officer, and Jamie Sutphin, who's the planning board's attorney. So that's the group that has been working on this recently. Previously, John Leffler and Rich Rossetti from the town board worked on this project as well. And going forward, Heather Waters, who's the current town councilor, will be joining us to work on the rest of this project. But for now, I'd like to go to our PowerPoint briefly and welcome the people that are on Facebook. And why am I not seeing the Facebook?
I'm not sure, but there are 5 people watching.
Right, well, hello, Facebook people. I hope to have you come on soon. Here we come. There you are. Hi. So hello, Facebook. And you can type in messages and Allison will be watching for that and let us know if you have questions. So I see it. Strat. I have to share screen. So everybody can see the screen now? So this is how the town board's zoning shows up now. It's available on zone at code 360, and that's available currently and will be if going forward as well. So the purpose of our group was to help address inconsistencies in the code. The commercial codes are now set up with a template so that they're more standardized than where they were before. And this is intended to make it easier to compare sort of apples to apples between the different code districts. The other thing that we did was we classified restaurants into fast food, coffee house, fast casual, casual dining, and fine dining, which are industry categories, because we wanted to have some types of restaurants be allowed in certain areas and other types not. So this is the restaurant classifications, and we picked some just restaurants that are around the area for people. This is for illustration purposes only. It will not be official, but the idea was for you to think about like what makes something a fast casual versus casual dining. And what the way that we did this was through the how you order, receive, eat, and oops. I'm sorry, you're covered up. So that this was the idea behind the restaurant classifications. So I'm going to pause a minute and see if there's any questions regarding the restaurant classifications part before we move on. Okay. Then we came to the permitted uses, and this we set up in this chart format. Again, here's our restaurants, and the idea was to show what type of restaurant would be permitted and which type of business, and how all of that would work. So I'm going to go out of this and share the actual spreadsheet. So here is the spreadsheet of the different permitted uses. And there, we have some challenges with wording here, so we would like to be able to have help in maybe coming up with better phrases for some of these. So that's part of the purpose of this public comment period, is is to help us make sure that we're describing things in a way that's clear and accurate to people. Oops. Sorry. I lost it. All right. So it's hard to share screen and be on the thing. There's a question in the chat, but I can't open it.
I can help you with that. Yes, it is very hard to share screen and exist inside the meeting. I have 3 screens in front of me. So there are 2, they're from Heather. She said, yes, would suggest some additions to the grid. Starbucks now has a drive-through ordering via app and using frequent delivery. Within the next 10 years, we may have driverless cars delivering, etc. And want to think about parking, waiting, traffic related to that. And meant not just Starbucks, but other restaurants.
All right, thank you. So this is the idea of ordering through the app. So it's sort of pickup and delivery, like curbside. A lot of the restaurants have curbside now. So we need to think about how to call that. And of course, there was a lot of innovation due to the pandemic that restaurants became doing a lot more things than they used to do with regard to that. So thank you for that. We'll work on it.
Yes, Sarah, it seems that all restaurants were becoming curbside.
Yes. So we may need to look at the delivery part, like here in this category here, can people see here, there's a thing drive-through as accessory use. We may have to think of additional categories of curbside, you know, email ordering, something along those lines that would need to be added to that. With the drive-through category, it would be like another whole area. And it does involve some amount of not parking, but I guess technically it's called standing, where the car is just sitting there while it's waiting for somebody to come out. So we need to make spaces for that.
It might fall under takeout or dine-in type thing. Yeah. But takeout doesn't always mean curbside. You can go in and get. So
yeah, so that's a good. We'll have to think about making a reference to that somehow, so that restaurants are clear if it's not going to be permitted somewhere, that they understand that, because that wouldn't be fair since everybody's gone to that model right now. So just on that point, in the old code, there was a lot of restrictions on outdoor dining, and we removed that because outdoor dining is very common now, and pretty much every restaurant has it. So this curbside is kind of the same thing, and we'll have to update in the same way with that. So we came up with these categories of retail, sales, personal services, and I'm anxious to come up with other words for some of these things that would be, that would address the classification, but perhaps not be as redundant. Business and professional offices, the drive-throughs, public places of entertainment, theaters and arcades and so forth. Then these types of restaurants. Then we had the congregate care, which would include both for elderly and for children. Gathering places, we were thinking about religious establishments, but also libraries or other kinds of facilities that might be where, and those are really identified now as sort of, you know, the places that are still closed, those are gathering places. And then the commercial businesses, we spent more time on the outdoor than I would have expected, but this turned out to be kind of a confusing area because there's been some uses that were just not, we weren't clear in our rules of what was permitted and what wasn't. So this was an area of, particularly these self-storage units, that was one of the things that triggered this group in the first place, because that was an industry that just hadn't existed 20 years ago. And now everybody, there's people with all these pod type things around. So that was an area where we wanted to be able to address. And then we have a lot of car dealerships in the town, and they park cars at their dealership, but also in other lots. And so we wanted to accommodate for that. So that's where this goes through. And then in terms of the X's would be where those places would be permitted. So moving over, we also have in the commercial, most of these things are permitted in commercial A, B, or industrial. There's only a few things that really separate, and they're down here in this outdoor area primarily, where you can do things in commercial B that you can't do in commercial A. So, any questions about that?
You have a couple comments. Elaine says, I would also link outdoor dining to the way we look at noise in our code, which we could update. Elaine says, if restaurants are defined in the table, but the table is just for illustration purposes, do we need to define restaurant categories? And then Heather wrote, what about pop-up establishments? Seems to be a more common occurrence in cities. And Sarah, if you want, I can speak to how the table was intended.
Okay.
So originally, when the table was created, John Loeffler had created the table, and the table will be at this table that is on the screen right now will be added to the code, and will be part of the code, and that's how it was intended. So there is a table that is for illustration purposes. I think it had all the different kinds of restaurants in there, but that would not be added to the code.
But I think Elaine's point is we can do that. We can, in our definition section, we can define the types of restaurants.
Oh, yes, yes. But in terms of how this table relates, this table that's on the screen right now will be in the code. The restaurant table will not. Correct.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So impacting noise is one of the issues that that we're trying to address through what we call the intensity of a use. It's difficult to make a zone have like a decibel level, but we are trying to address that through the noise ordinance if necessary. So I'm going to get out of this.
So Sarah, when you mentioned noise ordinance, are you talking about like if establishments have outdoor bands while they're also eating at the establishments? Is that
right? That kind of thing is that we need to have a mechanism for that, which is if it's permitting now. So it's like the zone doesn't permit bands. The bands is something that requires a permit. So it's balancing those things. I think the issue with the outdoor dining is really more of that if your outdoor dining area is really close to a noisy street, it just makes it noisy to dine there. But people do, and they don't seem to mind. So I think it really does depend on the business type in terms of whether that matters or not to them.
Okay.
Elaine, is that what you were trying to get, or were you trying to get it as the diners would be making noise?
Hang on one second. So Heather said it was me.
Oh, sorry.
And let me just say, she meant the diners.
Okay. So if the diners are making noise next to a residential area?
In relationship to residents, for example.
Okay. Okay. Outdoor bands require permit. Making a note of that. Okay. Then the codification process, that was just something we did. It's not this, and we're going to get back into this a little bit more where we're trying to zero in on the codes that had some inconsistencies that general code needed advice about. hopefully we will have addressed a lot of those through this process. So this is the neighborhood shopping district. The only place where this exists now is the little plaza on 298 near where Bowman Road comes out.
That's 290.
290, okay, sorry. And all of these types of buildings are permitted, so it's really quite flexible. And this, I think, is something that we should be encouraging because it really does provide a lot of opportunity for developers without going all the way to commercial. Regional shopping is the mall. And then commercial A is intended to be for the majority of commercial businesses would fit into this category. And you can do almost anything that a business would want to do. In this category, there's only a few things that are not permitted in commercial district A. So given those first few groups, is there any questions about the existing classifications? What we did for these was really just clean up the language. We didn't change what they could do or not. We just made that template where we give their purpose and their uses.
No questions on Facebook. No more Q&A.
So in commercial B, this is an area where you have primarily lumber yards and gas stations are in commercial B. So those are the things that you can't do in commercial A that you can do in commercial B. And Jamie Sutphin has joined us. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. You can't make this stuff up. Nobody was burning up.
Safely, that's the key thing.
Well, we're glad it was safe for you to return.
Yes, thank you.
So these are what we call more high intensity businesses. And this is where you would expect more noise, maybe more 24-hour activity, that kind of thing that would be in a commercial B district and not in a commercial A. And then we go all the way to industrial, which permits big, noisy, smelly, everything is permitted there. And so we did, the other thing that we did with this was creating this mechanism for acknowledgement, where if somebody does buy a house in an industrial district, because there are some, that they would be informed and they would attest that they understand that somebody could build a factory next door. And just for them, just so that they understand that they are buying a house in an industrial zone. So that's it for the existing. Is there any comments on that before I move
on? Two participants have raised their hand. So it looks like Elaine would like to ask a question. So I'm going to hit allow to talk. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So for the acknowledgement, is that if they're purchasing a house and their zone is acknowledgement, or lots around them too?
So it's for the purpose of when you are, let's say, buy a house in an industrial zone, you know, that people will know, that you'll know. Mm-hmm. Is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You're doing something in an industrial zone, so you know, like, hey, this might not be the best place to do that, or in the future you may have a problem with a neighbor. Because
but I think Elaine's question was if you were in an RA zone, but the industrial zone was next door,
yeah,
how would we know to warn those people?
Yeah, we don't have anything for that. But I guess we'd have to see if that's even an issue, right? You know, is there any RA that backs up directly to industrial? I guess we should look at that as a question.
All right, so that'll be an action step, is we'll just look into that a little bit more. Because there aren't a lot of industrial zoned areas, so it would be pretty easy for us just to do a little assessment of who's there and who might need to do this. There was a second question. Allison?
Yes, Heather has her hand up. So I will hit allow to, oh, nope, she took her hand down. So,
Okay.
Question for you on those regarding where people live and what have you. Is that our responsibility or place to notify a homeowner when or someone who's going to buy a property that they need to know that they're buying next to an industrial, or is that up to them and their realtor to do that?
I really misspoke because it only has, we don't really deal with the home situation. It would deal with other kinds of uses because the planning board has no authority over residential or the process. But, you know, some lesser intense use that you end up, like you want a nice little barber shop and you put it in an industrial, you need to know what that involves. Where you could put it someplace else if you wanted to.
So
Heather has her hand up.
how would residents know that they were buying a house in an industrial zone?
So we do some zoning research letters for the home buying process, but that's more of a real estate thing that happens.
Only if someone asks.
We have a hand up. Let's see. She does have a question now. All right, I am going to hit allow to talk.
Mhm.
All right. Go ahead, Heather, if you unmute.
Hi, am I unmuted?
You're there. Go ahead.
Okay, I also started writing this in the Q&A. We don't have a category right now for artisans or makers. So I'm thinking about people who might use some sort of technical equipment to make something, like if you want to forge, you know, cast iron stuff. I'm thinking of real things that I've seen in other parts of the community, like at the Delavan Center, where they make, there are these people who make these really high-end cast iron skillets. And so, you know, it's a great business. They've done really well. They actually moved out of the Delavan Center. And then, you know, jewelry makers and people like that who might have to have certain kinds of equipment, but they have maybe safety regulations around that, maybe certain for chemicals or something might need a certain size, all of that. Wondering if we would deal with that now or put a pin in that and think about that for the comprehensive plan.
I think that's a great idea to incorporate into the chart of that kind of business, because you could, I mean, there's some artists who, you know, carve with chainsaws, you know, whatever. There's things that could be noisy or disruptive to neighbors. And certainly you can have, I'm just thinking like people who work with kilns, you know, there's,
right.
They might want to be in an industrial zone because that's where they'd want their studio to be, where they would be able to make noise and put out big things. So I think that's a very good point that we did not address.
You know, I'm so surprised that you mentioned the chainsaw carving. My niece is actually a chainsaw carver. So it's a perfect example. She doesn't, you know, she usually feels as though they do need to be in places that are quite set apart because of the noise. So very helpful to think about. But also the pop-up piece, I didn't hear whether or not we were thinking about that. I don't know if we have the infrastructure for licenses. I think that might be at the county level. Like if you're a pop-up shop that's not just a garage sale, say for like 4 weeks, you're going to be doing X, Y, or Z, and you want to serve food, that's, you know, the health department or something, isn't it? But I don't know how people would do something like that in our code right now.
So I think that's one of the challenging things. We talked about food trucks as an example of a roving business. And I think that actually this does not address that, this is one of the things that we have to bring back from, that we don't have a code to address pop-up or portable businesses.
Right, and it's a great interim solution for empty storefronts too, right? Say a business that's just getting started is kind of proving whether or not they need space, right? Say you're whatever kind of business, you're sort of building your market. You might want to rent it for maybe some business exited with a certain number of months kind of left open on a lease or something, and they want to sublet, that kind of thing. That's been happening in other places. And if we could be more of an incubator, I wonder, and I believe that the Chamber of Commerce would be interested in that kind of, economic momentum. So,
an existing storefront, it wouldn't affect zoning because if it was a store inside a store, we don't care who the store is. It's
right. Okay, great.
more of these street side ones that I think.
Right. Okay, great.
Even like if someone, if you wanted to do pop-up, because that's what you're talking about, Allison, like put up something in a parking lot. Again, right now our code doesn't address that because that would be an additional use on a site. And it would be a non-permanent structure. But it's, I get it. It's something that that probably needs to be discussed and as we move forward, I think, on this committee.
Yeah, so the example we gave is even the farmer's market at Town Center.
Oh yeah, how does that work?
That technically they probably should, that would be like an additional use, but because they're zoned where they're already a shopping district, that they're allowed to have shopping. So it was sort of under their umbrella. If you were a business that wasn't that, but wanted to put a farmer's market in your yard, then that would be a little bit more challenging.
How does that work for insurance, for example? Like, are these the questions? Like, how does a business owner sort of know how to navigate it? I guess within our town is one of the questions. I guess how is this code helping people understand? Okay, this is a permit versus this is our zoning.
Well,
that's just a general question I'm throwing out, not to necessarily be answered right this second.
Now, in the chart, it says permit needed. So
okay, great. Okay.
Other things say special use permit required. So we do try to provide that communication to people.
Right. So maybe permits are the way to deal with these not permanent situations.
There's such a thing as a solicitor permit, which is when somebody wants to sell something door to door. And sometimes that's used for somebody trying to sell something off a truck. The thing is, our experience has been most of the things people are trying to sell off a truck have been food, and so the health department has been involved.
Right.
But if we think about the person who wants to sell the velvet Elvis blankets, which are not food, how do we, I believe they would need a solicitor permit. Jamie, can you address that? I think that's how that would work.
Well, I think the solicitor permit is really meant for a door-to-door situation. So I would go back to, I don't believe that we have a way in our code to address that sort of temporary selling of something. We've kind of carved out that farmer's market sort of as an understood exception over time. But this is an important, it's a very philosophical discussion as well, because of that, the people who invest in the brick and mortar get very upset about it because they're investing in brick and mortar. So that's the one side. On the other side, there's that argument that you make very well, which is, hey, they want to try something out, see if it works before they get their brick and mortar. So thanks for bringing it up. We don't have a solution to it. Currently, it's not allowed, is I guess what I could tell you right now, Heather.
Yeah, so I think that's why we wanted to do this, is maybe we can work on that and come up with something that would at least address it, because certainly those are getting increasingly common, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that the lines are blurring. It's just the behaviors of consumers are changing so much, and the way people shop and all of that is changing. So I want us to be thinking ahead versus holding on to the structure and the assumptions we have about the way people shop. The other thing is, things are happening in a sort of a, people are getting permits for food trucks and vendors of sorts, or they're not doing it with any, or they're doing it maybe with a county license, not a town license maybe, or permission, because, you know, people are, you know, bringing food trucks to events in their own, on their own private property, right? And they are sometimes showing up within the within a festival sort of permit, right? So those things are so. I think it's. I agree that I think it's a good thing to sort of understand where we want to see them and when, I guess, or when we're open to it.
Agreed.
Okay, that sounds good. Any more on that? That I put that down as an action step. We definitely need to explore that in more depth.
Great. Thanks, and feel free to close up my mic.
So then the other thing that we wanted to do with this process was to create a new zoning district that would be the bridge between residential and commercial. And currently that bridge is residential mixed use, which was intended to be in the areas that were adjacent to residential R1, and that the theory of them were things that were converted homes. So they were homes that nobody lived in anymore, and they were converted to offices. The genesis of this in a town board discussion was that it seemed like there was a big gap between residential mixed use and neighborhood shopping, and that we didn't really have a good, clear zone description that would address the kinds of businesses that sort of fell between these two. So we created something called Transitional Business District, with the idea that it would be low impact, professional, and this is, you know, it's inferred that these would be things that are quieter, less disruptive, less traffic, just not really busy, I guess, you know, sort of laid back businesses that would not be disruptive to an actual resident living close by. And there are none now because it's not, we haven't created it yet, but this would be the concept of one of the things we're looking to do. So let me go back to that. So are there any questions about the transitional business district?
I just wanted to comment on the transitional business district. I kind of envision it as if maybe that front part of Mallard's Landing, that was all developed kind of at once. But if that, you know, they had all these lovely homes, but the front part's on Genesee Street, well, wouldn't it be nice to have some kind of compatible commercial use that was not disruptive? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that there's, you know, if you look at, at Mallard's Landing, there's like some medical buildings and stuff, and they look like houses, sort of condos maybe, but you know, that kind of look is what we were envisioning for this, that it would not be disruptive to a neighbor next door with those kind of businesses. Whereas, you know, a busy restaurant, you know, maybe you, going back to Elaine's earlier point, you know, maybe you wouldn't want that next to a residence. Then the other thing, we were going to get rid of this technology development overlay zone because we had never used it. And then we were going to work on the definitions, and Elaine did give me some suggestions for the definitions, Jamie. So I'll be working with you guys to fill in a few blanks that that we want to make sure that we're being as clear as possible to everybody about that. And then, so these are.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Did you say that the transitional overlay zone, is that what you said? Yes, that because we've never used it. Has it ever been requested? I mean, I know that I've had someone come to me where they were thinking of doing something like that. And Jamie, can you just explain how that works?
You know, I'm not sure exactly what the procedure is, but I think it's a matter of like a zone change, requesting it, and it becomes an overlay. I didn't read exactly how it was supposed to be implemented, but generally the way those are implemented is by a request to the town board to implement the overlay, and then it becomes really a change. It's like a zone change, a change in the zoning district.
But then it can go back to what it was if that business moves out? Or doesn't?
Yeah, yes, the underlying zoning is still there. And then that just allows this other thing to happen on the zone. If that use goes away, that zone's still there.
And you're sure we don't have any of those anywhere in the town?
We don't have any now, and as far as I know, the only time it was requested was in 2008.
Oh,
Why it's there, but it was passed in 2008.
So that's my, and the business didn't end up choosing to be in Manlius, and so it's never been used.
oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
But you've reminded me though, that I am going to make an action step. One of the things that this led to was around the, it was to make a way to permit a radar installation, which I think could be done in industrial anyway. So I'm just going to make a note to make sure that that's one of the items on the bullets, and we put it in industrial. So that's the end of that. The other thing I wanted to share was, yeah, so that's it. So I think all of you that are on now have seen where you can go to the document center and see copies of this material, but I want to make sure everybody on Facebook knows that as well, that all of this stuff is on the website and is available for people. If you want to share it with somebody else that couldn't be with us this evening, that we can do that as well.
Sarah, did you pull up the bullet, the chart at all? I know I wasn't here for a few minutes.
Yeah, we did go over that part. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what was said about that, but certainly there was years of discussion on that, really is the best way to put it. And it's not necessarily the end of the discussion. It's just a lot of committee people and input and town people coming up with these bullet points and, you know, what do these uses mean and stuff. So that's.
Yeah. And I think we need to continue to add to that as people start other kinds of businesses or see other kinds of things that would, you know, make a difference for them.
Okay.
Anything else for this informational meeting? All right, so let me just summarize what I have for the action steps. We need to think through and probably put some real meat into the whole idea of delivery, pickup, curbside, that whole thing. I think you missed that part, Jamie. That we need to make a category for that and decide if there's any kind of limitations so that it's very clear to people if that were to be so. I'm
sorry I missed that discussion, but it would seem to me that we should assume that many businesses are probably going to continue on some kind of model of that, and maybe all the future as far as we know it, and it's in site plan. It should be just part of site plan. So if your use is maybe a retail store, we should assume that you may have that use, and we should figure it out in the site plan process. That's just one thought.
Yeah. So, but I think we need to clarify that it is permitted, or if it's not going to be permitted, that because more and more people are going to do where you order something on your phone and then just swing by, and
right.
That needs to be clear. So
it'll be difficult if you don't have a parking lot.
Yeah. So I just think we need to clarify that. We're going to clarify on the acknowledgement of industrial that it would be through the planning board would be the process. So it doesn't actually affect residential at the moment, and we need to think about that. we're going to make a category for artisans and makers and have where they would be permitted or not permitted, or based on, we'd have to just think about if it's how noisy they are or how they use chemicals or smelly things, that whole thing. Or a lot of people just do it out of their home. So I think we need to, it might be that we don't restrict it at all. We just clarify that so that people understand what the categories are. We need to address the whole pop-up business and food truck issue, which was actually on our list for planning process. We knew we had to deal with that. And then in the as part of the removal of the transition of the overlay district is to incorporate the things that were going to be in the overlay district to make sure that they're all captured on the chart, so we know where they would be permitted or not permitted currently, which I think was radar and satellite, I believe, were the issues. So we'll just make sure that those are mentioned. So if some business in the future wants to do that, they'll know where it would be permitted or not. So that's my summary of action steps. Did I forget anything?
No, I don't. I think you got it all.
All right, well, I think that wraps it up for this meeting then. And if people have any additional questions, you can email, you can contact me directly. My contact information is on the slides that that are on the website. So thank you very much for your time.
Sarah, at our board meeting tonight, you might even mention that people can, this has been recorded, right? So that people would be able to watch this recording if they want to go, if they do have questions, once we get to your, to that item on the agenda.
Okay, thanks.
Just a suggestion there. So.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, Sarah, putting that together. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you in 45 minutes or so.
Now we get a break before the board.
Yeah.